Well, thank you so much. And those visuals capture better than any words can the sheer scale and ambition of what is being built here. Now, let us hear from the people driving that transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, our first conversation of the day is one of that goes right to the heart of Mumbai's everyday reality. Its infrastructure challenges and the bold plans to meet them. This is perhaps no one better placed to speak on this than the Commissioner of Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation, the woman at the helm of India's richest and most complex municipal body. We are honored to welcome IAS officer Ms. Ashwini Bhide, BMC Commissioner, in conversation with our own Vinay Vilas Deshpande. Thank you so much, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you so much for gracing the Hindus' flagship infrastructure conclave today. And I thank all of you to be here so early in the morning on a working day. She is one of the most sought after officers, someone who has broken the glass ceiling. She's the first woman municipal commissioner of the country's financial engine, which is Mumbai. And she has helmed several key infrastructure projects. So, today when we talk of infrastructure and Maharashtra, there's no better person to start this conclave, because you have not just helmed the Metro Aqua line, you have also helmed the war room of the Chief Minister. You have held several key charges, and now you're sitting in a chair which I'm sure is the hot seat. So let me begin by asking you, soon after you took charge, we saw early morning visits, 5 a.m. visits, 6 a.m. visits, and you have been visiting the dump yards, some of the areas where litigations are going on. Tell us about your first observations and learnings as the Municipal Commissioner of the Financial Capital.
Good morning. Thank you, Vinaya. Good morning, everyone. Municipal corporation is all about providing basic services to people. So while we do the glitzy mega projects, which are also required for the city, for smooth movement of traffic, for better connectivity, but at the same time, the day-to-day drill, which provides basic services to citizens, which is being carried out by municipal corporation as part of their mandatory duties. That is the most important thing, and these are the unsung heroes, the municipal workers who keep doing these things since morning till night and throughout the night, because our operations continue 24/7, but they are hardly in limelight. People hardly know about how municipal bodies function, how the basic services are delivered. And that is what municipal corporation's main job is. And when I joined there, and earlier I had the experience of implementing big ticket infrastructure projects, but I have also worked in municipal corporation as additional municipal commissioner. That time, on one hand, I was handling coastal road project, but on the other hand, I was looking at the fire department's operations, the garden department's operations. So I knew what BMC means for the citizens, what citizens expect from BMC. And that's why when I joined here, I thought my mantra should be go back to basics. Focus on the basic services which municipal corporations provides to the city. Because while we zip through the Aqua Line, the metro or coastal road, but still day-to-day reality is different. The cities need water, cities need their municipal solid waste cleaned, the sewerage needs to be flown properly, nalas need to be cleaned, and these are the basic responsibilities of a municipal body. All other things are built on that. And so that has been my focus, and the very reason for these early morning visits, because that is when BMC starts working. The SWM laborers, workers, they start collecting waste at 6 o'clock in the morning. The sewerage operation starts, they start working at that time. So I thought I must visit these places. I must see how they are functioning, what are the gaps in that, what people expect, how BMC actually functions. And that has been my focus, and that has been my first impressions of the municipal corporation's function.
Ma'am, you told us the reasons, you told us, how the BMC functions, but what about the takeaways? You went to Kanjur, which is, one of the biggest dump yards. Citizens have been complaining for years about stench there, about the mountains of garbage. There's a litigation we saw, even the High Court judges visit the place. What did you see, and what is the BMC going to do there?
The first and foremost thing is, it is not a dump yard. It is where the 6,500 metric tons of daily waste which we collect, that is treated. So this Kanjurmarg facility was set up, it was started, the work order was issued in 2011. So 2011-12, as per the technology which was available then, that is bioreactor and biomining, and that is what, and plus segregation of some waste which could be shredded and which could be used as fuel, some biodegradable waste which could be composted, and the rest of the waste is treated by a technology called bioreactor. So Kanjur is not a dump yard. Kanjur is a waste treatment facility. And every day, today it takes around 5,800 metric ton of waste, and it is processed. And it is as per, there may be some gaps in that process, but that is being processed. Of course, High Court is monitoring. High Court has given certain instructions. A technical committee of experts is looking into all those issues. And I have myself visited, though there are certain gaps, but that is what takes care of Mumbai's the municipal solid waste which we create on daily basis.
So what is the message to those staying around and who have been suffering due to health reasons?
I have not heard of people suffering from health reasons. Mainly the issue which was raised before Honorable High Court was about the smell, the stench, and that is being monitored. Because the facility will have, it's pretty inside. It is surrounded by mangroves on all sides. There are certain sections of that facility which are slightly closer to the human habitation or the colony which is thereby. And after due consideration, the committee has submitted a report to the High Court that certain facilities will be shifted inside, and that area will also be covered with thick vegetation. For past 3 weeks, throughout the night, on certain locations, the stench is being monitored, because the stench is generally created by hydrogen sulfide, which is one of the gases which are generated in this facility. And so far, I myself have seen those results. So far, those results are pretty mixed, and it is not that at one particular location you are getting that smell. So sometimes there are assumptions, there are optics, there are generalizations, but when you go down to the data, and if you see the actual readings, I think those readings will be presented to Honorable High Court. The technical committee will also look into it, and we'll have to see whether that stench, if people are getting, whether it is only because of Kanjur treatment facility or something else. As per Honorable High Court's order, even the citizens who are residing in the vicinity of that, they are also allowed and asked, rather requested, to be part of that monitoring team. BMC and Pollution Control Board, their officers are monitoring it from 1 to 6, because when Honorable High Court visited that site and they did their own calculation, they are also getting feedback from people, and they realize that the smell and stench comes at particular time in the night. So that is being analyzed. But whether that is within the facility or outside somewhere, that is being analyzed now. So whatever is the result of these observations, Whatever are the suggestions by the technical committee and the high level committee, BMC is committed to implement.
Ma'am, the other issue that has been going on in Mumbai is about the coastal road. We have seen that there are protests still continue. The Supreme Court had also, said that the Bombay High Court is seized with it. There are clearances for the coastal road project, but citizens feel aggrieved that 45,000 mangroves are going to be cut for a project which is not going to be built for public infrastructure but for private cars. So the comparison saying that this kind of road built, how will it add to public transport and whether it will take the load off the main lines of public transport, A, and secondly whether that is the cost we pay for private cars, for land acquisition and the mangroves that are cut. So how do you look at both these concerns?
I think this is a very, very simplistic statement that road projects are built for private cars only, as if private cars are not part of the overall transportation in a city.
So today, that is a minuscule part.
Let me explain. Yes. So today also, if you see the daily trips which are being carried out in the entire MMR, the percentage of private cars, what they contribute almost 30 to 35% of the daily trips in the city. And Mumbai has the road network of just 2,050 kilometers against the road network of 26,000 kilometers in a city like Delhi. So if you want to transport those many cars in a limited road network and then say that we shouldn't do anything about it, then I think we are contradicting ourselves. So we need to build cars. And which project is there in Mumbai which is not opposed, where protests have not happened? And after dealing with these protests, when these projects are completed, people have experienced that traffic has eased. Coastal Road South was equally opposed. There were a lot of litigations. Court had given stay almost for 2 years. And despite that, once the project is completed, people are experiencing how easy it is to reach the South Mumbai from north. So it is quite natural that a city like Mumbai needs this kind of a coastal ring road which takes them from the southern part of the Mumbai till northern part, and this north coastal road is part of that process. And I have been telling in other conversations also that no project in India happens in a vacuum without any monitoring, without any observation. There are very, very stringent regulations for each and everything. So environmental regulations are very stringent. Mangroves are part of protected forest, and they are being monitored by High Court. To get approval for any mangrove cutting, the process, it's a very multi-layered process which goes up to Ministry of Environment and Forest. Clearances take a lot of time. We have to prove that they are really required for completing that project, and that are further we need approval from Honorable High Court. And after getting that, only these projects are done. The replantation or the fresh plantation for mangroves is carried out by the mangrove sale, which is again a very, very specialized body. And as far as North Coastal Road is concerned, fortunately, the plantation of mangroves is happening along the coastal road. So the processes are stringently followed, and I'm very sure when the projects are completed, that it carries, because especially the coastal road, it's being a ring road, it will carry the heavy lifting of the existing load of the private vehicles on Mumbai's arterial roads, because we have just Western Expressway is the only way from where people can straight away come, and that how choked that road is, we are aware. So the larger impact of all these projects and the combined impact of all these projects is finally towards the betterment of the city, towards better carbon footprint of the city, and towards ease of moving in the city. And that is why these projects are required.
So you're saying that the mangroves are being planted along the same location itself.
And this is being done by the mangrove sale, which comes under the forest department, and BMC also of course assists them. The funding is done by BMC, but it is being done under their careful gaze.
Ma'am, for the current stretch of coastal road, we see that very limited BEST buses ply. When the coastal road is extended, is that something that will be addressed? Is that something that we will take into consideration for public transport?
You must have seen on the existing coastal road, there is a dedicated bus lane. There are bus stops. In fact, if somebody takes that bus lane, they are heavily fined also. So, coastal road has already accommodated the necessary infrastructure which is required for buses. Of course, BEST will have to ply more buses on the coastal roads. BEST is overall struggling on certain issues, but I'm sure a very comprehensive plan is being made for overall revival of the bus transport, because today's their fleet size is limited. They probably Mumbai needs 10,000 buses for everyday commute, but BEST today have close to 3,000 buses. They are trying their best to increasing the bus fleet, and as the bus fleet increase, some rerouting happens because we are laying down this metro network also. So BEST will have to on certain routes they have to work as a feeder network. On certain routes they have to work as a long-term route network. And once they have adequate buses in their fleet, I think most of the roads in the city you will see that they will be plying more and more buses.
Ma'am, this is a topic of a lot of concern for Mumbaikars because, traditionally it's not just the local trains but also the BEST buses which have been the lifeline of Mumbai. There have been concerns about the reducing fleet. You've just talked about a plan being in place. If you can talk to us a bit more elaborately about how BEST is to be rejuvenated really, because that is a concern not just for, the feeder routes, but also when we touch down on pedestrian infrastructure in some time. The BEST have also been very helpful on that crowd. So how do you see the rejuvenation of BEST, and what are the timelines that you will give to Mumbaikars that the BEST issue will be addressed?
First, we must understand what exactly is the underlying problem. Earlier, there were only two predominant modes of transport. That was the suburban rail system and the BEST buses complementing that system. Because entire economy of Mumbai, all the business footprint of Mumbai was along the suburban rail network. So people would reach to their respective station and then they take a bus and reach to their workplace. But over a period of time, many other land parcels got unlocked. The businesses moved to some places which are away from the existing suburban lines, and that is where the problem came, because that last mile connectivity from the suburban station was not easily available and Mumbai's roads got choked. As a result, BEST buses speed also got reduced. So earlier they used to carry equal number of passengers which used to travel in the suburban rail network, but slowly that number started going down because BEST couldn't they couldn't move. Their average speed was not even 7 to 8 kilometers per hour. So if that is the case, then people started shifting to other modes of transport, either by their own private vehicles, taxis, autos, or the aggregator services, and that's why Mumbai's roads got choked. Now, in the current scenario, and slowly as BEST was earlier, the bus outfit was getting cross-subsidized by their electricity operations, which stopped later on. With the Electricity Act, both operations became independent, so that the loss which they were dealing with, that actually put a lot of burden on them, and slowly the bus fleet got reduced. If we have to revive BEST today, we'll have to, and the BEST management is of course looking into it, but we have to also factor in that a new rail-based public transport is happening in Mumbai. That is the metro rail network. Today that network is close to 80 to 100 kilometers and 10 lakh passengers are traveling on the metro. While on suburban rail it is still 70 to 75 lakh passengers, but slowly those passengers are going to move to metros, and metros carrying capacity is going to increase. So taking that into account, BEST will also have to do a lot of rerouting. They, as I mentioned earlier, at certain places they will have to work as the feeder network. At some places they will have to maybe run the long route services. But taking that into account, they will have to work out how much fleet size they would need, and we have to ensure jointly, BEST, BMC, government, that they get that kind of fleet size. And for that, They will have to look into their own assets, what they have, and even think of some asset monetization, have their own resources, and then that can be complemented. Whatever is balanced can be complemented by BMC. The viability gap can be provided by BMC, and jointly that plan will have to be worked out. The first and foremost thing for the BST's revival is to increase the fleet size, because that is what is putting.
Is there any timeline and projection to it?
At the moment, I don't have those numbers because BST management is still working on it. We will have a discussion on it and they will present it to BMC also, and jointly we will decide how to revive that, because bus system is always going to be an important part of the public transport infrastructure in a city. Only suburban network or only metro network will not provide the last mile connectivity. So we have to think of public transportation in totality, and buses are an integral part of that ecosystem. And that's why it is very important that BEST retains its charm, retains its importance and significance, and all of us will jointly ensure that.
Ma'am, fleet size will increase. While increasing the fleet size, will you consider the smaller buses, which was an experiment which was done at many places, and we saw it as a successful experiment as well, which became the last mile connectivity. Smaller buses could navigate faster, and so obviously the frequency was better. So when this fleet size is going to be increased, will there be a focus on smaller electric buses as well?
At the moment, I can't speak on behalf of BEST management because they are still deliberating on it. But as a person who has worked in transport sector for past many years, I think we will need smaller buses, especially electric smaller buses, because the earlier experiment of smaller buses, diesel buses, has not been very successful. But maybe electric buses would work, because the last mile connectivity routes, especially for metro stations, they're looking at the width of the load network. We would probably need some section of the fleet to be of smaller electric buses. But I'm sure BST management, general manager BST, they are working on it. And once they are ready with their plans, then we will also discuss with them.
Ma'am, looking at the macro picture really, Maharashtra plans to be a $2 trillion economy by 2035. Mumbai has always been the financial engine of not just Maharashtra, but the country. How does BMC look at Mumbai when the goal is a $2 trillion economy?
Maharashtra's goal has a goal of $5 trillion economy by 2047. And by 2030-31, it is $1 trillion economy. Mumbai and MMR would obviously contribute substantially to this incremental growth. A growth hub plan for Mumbai metropolitan region was prepared with the help of Niti Aayog some time back. Today's MMR's economy is about $160 to $170 billion, and we plan to take it to $300 billion by 2030. And that would come from different sectors, different entities. Construction sector will contribute hugely. Infrastructure sector will contribute hugely. Housing will contribute hugely. Tourism also will contribute. And all entities will play their role, right from MMRDA, MHADA, CIDCO, Tourism Department, they will play their role. But BMC will also play a major role in that, in terms of infrastructure development within city, in terms of designing policies to give boost to certain service sectors in city. Because Mumbai's economy today is mainly contributed by the fintech sector, which is there in Mumbai. But going forward, I can see there is a huge scope for tourism. There is a huge scope for GCCs in Mumbai. There is a huge scope for hospitality and IEC industry in Mumbai, and also education sector, higher education. Many foreign universities are coming to Mumbai. So all these sectors will ultimately contribute, and of course entertainment sector. So the Growth Hub plan has identified which are the areas which would be further progressing and contributing to this incremental growth in our economy, and how BMC has to support that. Those issues have already been identified, some short-term, mid-term, long-term kind of action which BMC has to take, and the city's economic development plan has been prepared, and we have detailed out the projects which were identified in the growth hub plan, which were to be done by BMC, and our team is working on that.
Ma'am, can you identify a few of them for us?
If you take this tourism, then huge scope. There are many forts in the city which are today not even in the visible sight for Mumbai. There is a lot of crowding, a lot of encroachments within that. There are many places. The entire heritage district of Mumbai could be easily revived. There are multiple things which we could do to increase the tourism potential and attracting more and more foreign travelers in the city. So that is one focus area. Till now, the Tourism Development Corporation only was looking at it. But now, BMC as the municipal body, as well as the controller of a lot of things, a lot of assets in Mumbai, has to play a major role. Then another issue is hospitality. So what is the number of hotel rooms today in Mumbai, and how much scope there is to increase that? All those things are being identified. And how do you do it? So what kind of incentives are needed? What kind of ease of doing business issues we need to address? So all these things are being identified.
Ma'am, you know, as you identify these, one of the challenges that has always been the top challenges for Mumbai is decongestion. You know, Mumbai is expanding, the government is talking of Mumbai 2, Mumbai 3, but how do you decongest Mumbai? And, you know, with it becoming polycentric, more and more polycentric now, how do you see the criticality of decongestion?
I think we need to decongest Mumbai by just distributing the load across the city. And that process has already started happening. Earlier, whatever congestion or whatever densification which happened in Mumbai, that was along the existing public transport system backbone, that was the suburban rail system. As we have slowly started shifting to the alternative public transport mode, that is the metro system, now the densification has started happening around the metro stations. And the transit-oriented development policy which state government has already come up with, and that is applicable to the underground metro. So the policy is such that it leads to densification along those underground metro stations. If that happens, those many business districts, those many economic centers which we are creating, and that has started happening already. Worli has already become a very a densified kind of location in Mumbai. Similarly, that densification has started happening northwards. So that itself, the connectivity is the key. The places which are connected, they start getting the economic activity, and that process has already started happening through intervention of the public transport network, as well as the intervention which government is doing through policy framework.
But ma'am, what is the stage at which we are for a unified transport authority? Because often these, you know, networks that you're talking of don't speak to each other, and people end up spending a lot of time just to move from one network to another.
Lot of things are happening. The first and foremost thing which I would mention, though there may not be one single entity which governs all the transport corridors, but the soft integration has already started happening. And what I mean by soft integration, ease of moving from one corridor to another, irrespective of whoever is the operator of that corridor. And that kind of integration comes through common mobility ticketing, common mobility app. So National Common Mobility Card, NCMC cards, is the key. So all our, these NCMC cards are issued by all transport outfits, and those cards are adequate enough for people from moving easily from one transport to another. Then there are this Mumbai One app and so many other apps which also gives that ease of movement, because we don't have, we have certain legacy issues. We can't straight away go for what Transport for London does or what MRT in Singapore does or Hong Kong does. But within our legacy issues of having multiple agency, lot of efforts are being done to integrate the efforts. That is one thing. And second is this, the concept of UMTA, which we have been toying for past many years, that is slowly now getting the legal backbone. There has already been a committee who have mulled over this, and a legal framework is prepared. That act is in the process. So once that is done, all authorities, they will work independently, but the common thread remains the same. In a city like Tokyo, there is a huge, almost 1,000 kilometers of railway and metro network, and the operators are all different. It's not that one single entity is running all the lines, but at some level they get integrated, and the common commuters won't even realize who is operating that corridor. The similar situation, equivalent of the same, we can create in Mumbai, and we are processing towards that.
Is there any timeline to it?
Yes, I also wish, but see, once
Because ma'am, this is aspiration, and obviously this is something that
I agree. We have been working, but sometimes when we deal with so many legacy issues and so many institutional challenges, it takes some time for that idea to get mature, and once it is matured, it gets implemented quickly. So UMTA for past, since I was in CM office also, so I know past 1 year, there has been a critical advancement as far as the concept of UMTA is concerned. The bill is already prepared, and that will go through the rigor of the legislative approval and final approval. So we are at a very, very critical stage where I think the reality of UMTA is not far away.
Okay, thank you. But you know, there's another question I want to ask about public transport itself. You know, you are being hailed as the metro woman, particularly after the launch of Aqua Line. All those who take the Aqua Line would like to know two things from you, which are, you know, some of the deepest concerns. I'm sure many of us take the Aqua Line, but one is that there's no mobile network, and that consistently remains to be a challenge. What happens in the times of emergency? And secondly, you know, there are so many stations which are not directly linked to the local train network. No travelators, no, you know, while we understand that land acquisition might have been an issue, but there doesn't seem to be any quick way of moving quickly from the local train to the metro. That seems to be the missing link really. Is there anything that is going to happen on those lines? And what was the issue? Was it not thought of while planning, or were there any other constraints?
The first question is about mobile network. Let me tell you, while building the metro, we set up a fully done, very robust 5G network inside that infrastructure, inside the tunnels and stations. So it was the responsibility of the mobile companies to latch on that and provide mobile services. They did that for initial few months, and then they withdrew for whatever reasons well known to them. It was also seen that the entire Telecom Act and regulation was changed after we started these services, and then suddenly the mobile services were made fundamental or the basic services to be provided by a government entity, and then the free availability of that transport, that network, which was created after spending 100 crores almost, was set up. So we were already in one contract where the aggregator was supposed to provide this, that network, the infrastructure to mobile companies, and which they were not ready to join. Blame, of course, is always put on the public entity, so we had that blame. Since then, we have been negotiating with them to finally we left all our whatever expectation to recover that cost, and we negotiated, but that took a lot of time. Now I'm very happy to say that after a lot of efforts and after a lot of wooing them, we have finally brought them on the network. LOA is already issued, so this telecom services from our side now, everything is given. And I'm sure the next 2 to 3 months, because the telecom companies are also supposed to provide services to their customers. So they will come up, though they have given us time of 2 to 3 months, but I'm sure they are also sensitive to the demands of their customers, and they will come up with these services very fast. The infrastructure is already laid down. Second point about last mile connectivity. Unfortunately, when the project was done, a lot of connectivities to nearby stations were planned, but as it always happens, people oppose to Churchgate station to the main Churchgate station by an underground pathway of 150 meters. We were supposed to connect our station and Dadar station by an underground pathway of 500 to 600 meters. We were supposed to give direct entry of Mumbai Central Station inside Mumbai Central Railway Station, but everything was opposed. Churchgate was opposed because some trees were getting cut. Dadar was opposed because that lane was full of hawkers and whatever the commercial establishment. This straight connectivity, pet-to-pet connectivity to Mumbai Suburban was opposed by the railways. Now, I can't keep on fighting with them and leave aside the whole project. So we had to scuttle. We said, okay, 100-meter distance from the main Churchgate station to Churchgate, it's not that difficult to walk on the cross. Mumbaikars are used to walk. Same is, we managed to get a station entry done in the Mumbai Suburban Station campus only, though it was not a pet-to-pet connectivity. And the other, yes, there is a 500 to 600 meter walk, which people have to do. But everywhere you can't connect these stations to suburban stations, because the Mumbai Metro Line alignment is much away from the suburban stations at most of the locations, because that was the whole idea, to give connectivity to those areas where there is suburban train is not going at all. So you can't expect that everywhere this connectivity will be there, but I fully accept that there has to be a last mile connectivity, and which is to be provided by other complementary services. BEST is one of them, auto rickshaws is another of them, taxis is another of them, and services like Uber, Ola is another of them. We have created all necessary infrastructure for all these services to reach the station and start them. But everybody keeps waiting in the wings that when the ridership happens, then we will go there. So this is a process. So no new public transport immediately gets that traction. It takes time, but I am guaranteeing you that each and every station, something or the other is moving. People have been coming up with new ideas to provide the last mile connectivity. And maybe once our line gets connected to Metro Line 2, Metro Line 6, Metro Line 4B, then automatically that network effect will come, and all other players will also start moving to fetch those commuters and take them to their last mile destination. So this is an evolution, this is a process that is still a work in progress, and I'm sure that will happen in another year or so.
Ma'am, one of the last questions really, and this is about monorail. How do you assess the monorail? It was critiqued as a doomed project from the beginning, but we have seen that it connected regions which did not have connectivity earlier. The biggest problem was that it did not connect directly to many stations which it was supposed to do as the feeder line. How do you assess what were the challenges, and do you think it was successful at all? When will Mumbai see monorail running again? And clearly during the last monsoons, while there were a few accidents, as in there were a few stall-ups, it was also a line that saved people from the low-lying areas. So how do you see the monorail really?
Sometimes the projects are perceived to have been failed because there is a complete information deficit. Because people don't understand, those who are supposed to understand also don't understand why that project was built, what purpose it was supposed to serve. Monorail, since I was associated with in the beginning, monorail alignment was through such a stretch that no other rail-based public transport network was possible, because that's a very, very narrow stretch and with too many curves, sharp turns, and that was a stretch which was also along many mill lands, which were under development, many through the hospital district, and through some such locations which were not at all even on the suburban rail network, nor a proper bus system was present there. And that is why that road was chosen to build the monorail, which can negotiate sharp turns, which can negotiate sharp curves, and provide that connectivity. But on the way, what happened? Certain section, and the first corridor, first phase started also on time, but because of various issues, the second phase took more than 7-8 years to complete. And by the time that was done, the number of trains which were supposed to be there, they were not there. And the only problem of monorail today is the less number of trains, which had that number been as per the original planning, the frequency would have been such that that corridor would have carried almost 40 to 50,000 passengers every day, which otherwise travel on road by their private cars or by the other modes of transport except public transport. Now, how that has been revived? So I think MMRD and MMMOCL have been working hard to revive that, and they have already in the process of getting a new fleet of trains. But when you get new fleet of monorails, then you need to also change the signaling system, and they have developed the indigenous CBTC signaling system, which is under testing. Monorail, unlike metro, it is not covered by Metro Act. It was done under the Tramways Act, and that is why the safety rigor, which is there for the metro, which is the CMRS, that is the Central Metro Rail Safety Commissioner, it doesn't fall in their purview. So you have to adhere to a different safety protocol, which is being done. And I'm told that again 15 odd trains would be made available for that corridor. It is awaiting that opening. Once that is done, I'm very sure that that corridor is going to serve a lot of population living in that area, and also it will provide an easy access to the hospital districts, the Tata Memorial Hospital, KEM, all those hospitals will get a better connectivity by monorail.
Ma'am, you've shown us what the nitty-gritties and the complexities of working a metropolis like Mumbai are. You know, we come towards the fag end of this, and there's a rapid fire round for you. What is more challenging, running the war room or running the BMC?
Of course, BMC.
Hands down?
Yeah. Because here you are in the doer's position. War room, you are observing, and you are asking others to do what they should do.
Ma'am, what do you tell those who try to influence you? I'm sure there are people who try to influence you. You've sat in positions where...
I think whoever wants to influence me, I will always take the inputs or the positive inputs from what they are saying. But finally, I will do what I want to do and I'm supposed to do.
Can you tell us any one story of where there were clear efforts to influence and where you had to stop it?
It's a daily affair. So
and with the BMC, I'm sure it is.
Yes. No, but see, those I take it as a positive input, because people try to reach out, people try to influence, because everybody feels that unless we reach the top, things won't move, things won't happen. And these are some of the shortcomings of our system, because it's a behemoth. It is so huge that even while people are working on a particular issue, they can't communicate with the people for whom they are working. And especially with BMC, I have seen, because I have ensured that communication to people was effective while constructing Mumbai Metro line, because I knew what was happening. But in a authority organization like BMC, thousands of things keep happening. As I tell you, throughout the night, our groups are, because trees fail, fire, multiple, almost every day, every night, there are hundreds of small fire incidents which happen, and our people keep tackling with that. There are some where the pipe gets burst, some where the house fails, some wall falls. So these things keep happening and people are working through that. But the problem is what they exactly are doing, they can't communicate that effectively to people because they don't have time for that. And as a result, most of the things are, assumed or perceived in a different way. And any organization's image is built through perceptions rather than facts and actual data. Because maybe that data in a very scientific form is not available to people, or people don't have time to do that. So that's the reason why people try to influence, because they don't want to take a longer or harder route to make your point, but they just want, okay, I know the commissioner, so just send a message. Sometimes I ask them, have you visited your ward office? Have you seen what they are doing? Have you raised your point to your local officer, local councillor? Because they are also part of this whole decision-making system. But yes, for me, I have to educate people also. I have to take those inputs from them. So I don't get influenced myself, but I ensure that whatever inputs I get, they are sent to the right entity on the ground, who that officer or the department of ours, and they ensure that that problem is solved or that issue is resolved.
Can you recollect one of the tense moments of such interactions?
Not now, after spending more than 32 years in the service. Now, that doesn't put me in, give me any stress. And I have learned my ways of negotiating through that and still handle those issues. So as of at the moment, I'm not recollecting any such thing.
Okay, that's really cool to maintain that temper and to sit there. Toughest challenge while breaking the glass ceiling?
I think it is more of a perception challenge. So on technically speaking, that glass ceiling should not be there. Women have been part of administration from times immemorial, and they have been doing a great job. But somehow it is perceived that certain jobs are not for women officers. So there are two things. One, because a women officer is posted, there are too many expectations. They suddenly feel that there is a magic wand and things will change. Some feel that as a woman, they can't handle situations which are meant for men, especially dealing with the political representatives, dealing with the general bodies and the standing committees. So it's a mixed basket. So I personally feel that I have not broken any glass ceiling, that I don't see that glass ceiling myself, because I have never constrained myself by the gender consideration. I always thought, if you are a good officer, if you are an empathetic officer, you are an honest and hardworking officer, then you have your ways through the system, irrespective of your gender.
Do you think that women, especially when they rise to leadership ladders, have to work doubly hard to prove that they are worthy of being where they are?
To some extent, yes, because again, perceptions and some assumptions are done. But more than, it is more associated to your individual personality than to your gender. If an hardworking officer, he is or she is hardworking irrespective of the gender. If you want to make gender as an excuse for things, that also you can do. So I think it is more about you as an individual, what metal you are made of, what is your philosophy of life, what is your philosophy towards your profession, and that only defines how you play your role rather than your gender.
The best posting of your administrative career so far?
I think all of them were best. And I have
that's
done
a diplomatic answer.
No, not that. I have done very few postings. My career as a bureaucrat is much different than other bureaucrats because I have stayed on one posting for more than 5 years. Most of my postings are like that. And that's the reason I could start a project and I could complete. Even in MMRD, I was more than 5 years. I could complete at least 10 to 12 major infrastructure projects. Same thing happened with MMRC. So every posting when I did, I thought this is the best posting. So why? Because I got to do a lot. I got to see what I started getting completed. I got to see, and that is something which is rare in a career of a civil servant. The reason is, otherwise we get transferred every 3 years. Many a time you do something, you do a very sound foundation, but the fruits are reaped much later. But in my case, it was always the other way around, and that is why every posting I found that it was better than the other, but all were really good. So I can't choose.
Okay. Ma'am, where you're sitting right now, people say that's the dream posting. What is a dream posting for you?
I don't think people know what this post is. So, yes, in a way it is a dream post because you get a lot to do. You can touch hundreds of lives. You can make a lot of changes in their lives. This is a very, very beautiful city which deserves a lot more in terms of better quality services, better quality infrastructure, better livability. And I think municipal commissioner is the one who is at the helm of the officer, has of the system, has a lot of, not power I would say, but lot of vision from the top, which he or she can see where the bottlenecks are. And that one person and one office doesn't have any excuse to say, yes, I couldn't do it because somebody else didn't do it, because everything is under you. So this is something which put lot of stress also on you, because you can't give any excuse. Many a time my officers say, madam, this doesn't belong to me, this belongs to solid waste management, this belongs to... I said, you have those excuses, I don't have. So as a body which has so many silos and so many entities together, we have to jointly perform. So this post gives that satisfaction also, that you can resolve a lot of issues and you can make changes in people's lives, but it puts a lot of burden, lot of responsibility on you, and the stress of rendering that responsibility will always be there.
Okay, so this is the
so
dream
whether to
posting
call
then.
it a dream posting or what, that is
or a
up to
Kanto ka
those.
Taj.
Yeah, yes.
So, ma'am, one last question. What is your advice for the young officers, administrators? We have a few young officers who have come all the way from Nashik to discuss Kumbh Mela for us. What's the one thing you will tell young officers to do, and what's the one thing you will tell them to avoid?
The first and foremost thing is the commitment to the cause. Why you have joined the service? Is it the public service or it is some other objective? You need to be true to your objective. You need to be passionate about why you joined the service. You shouldn't crib about it. If you are paid in a particular way, you are provided facilities in a particular way, you can't compare yourselves to somebody outside the system and then be demanding about it. That is first thing. Second is, you should own what you are doing. Once you have that sense of ownership, you yourself will work very hard to deliver it, because that is very important. So my advice, and many of these are my young colleagues who have been working very closely with me, and I've seen them working with that kind of passion and devotion. So passion, devotion. Another thing is transparency and non-partisanship. You need to be absolutely transparent. That transparency gives you a lot of power, because if you have to hide things, then you won't be able to perform with that power. You need to command respect by your hard work, by your passion, by your transparency, and by being non-partisan. You should not favor anyone, but at the same time, you should follow the principle of natural justice. You should be a good listener. Many a time, we think that the post comes with a lot of power, and that power at times blinds you. That should not happen. There is power, but that power is for the public good, and that's why you should be a good listener. Your ear should be always at the ground. You should work as a team leader, a team builder. Alone, you can't make any change. It is the team which you lead that makes change, and that is why to command the respect. And last but not the least, you need to be decisive. So while integrity is very important, while honesty, being passionate, being devoted is very important, but you should be taking decisions. You should, because that is why you are there. You can't dodge the balls. You have to decide. And if you follow these basic principles, then you will be able to deliver what you are supposed to do on sitting on a particular post. And then don't run after the posts. You will, whatever responsibility you get, you deliver it, and you will command the respect which the people will give you, irrespective of which post you are on. Because every department in government is important. It is serving to some purpose which is important from the public good perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause. Thank you so much, Bide ma'am. We know that you have reshuffled meetings and you have been kind to prepone your schedule by an hour to be here to grace the Hindus' flagship infrastructure conclave, and we are really grateful to you for that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vinaya. It has always been a pleasure to interact with you, and this was a excellent way to start my day today. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Yeah.
Well, that was truly commendable and illuminating conversation. Commissioner Bide, once again, thank you so much for your candor, your clarity, and your vision for this beautiful city. Now, moving on, we have a small mark of appreciation. We have a small felicitation, and I request the Hindu's editor, Mr. Suresh Nambat, to please come forward. Yeah, we can keep clapping. People, keep that energy in the room.